Who is Klaus Schwab? Klaus Martin Schwab was born on March 30th, 1938, in Ravensburg, a small town in the state of Baden-Württemberg in Germany. Born just a year before World War II began, Schwab's early childhood was shaped by the shadows of totalitarianism, war, and the post-war rebuilding of Europe. These conditions would form the backdrop for his ideological development, his worldview, and his belief in the power of coordinated international cooperation. His father, Eugen Wilhelm Schwab, was the managing director of a German branch of a Swiss industrial company called ETH Zurich, which had close connections to Nazi Germany during the war. These associations, though not often discussed in mainstream media, have led to much speculation in alternative circles. Some researchers claim ETH Zurich was involved in advanced weapons systems for the Third Reich, though direct documentation linking the younger Schwab to these activities remains limited. Nevertheless, growing up in a family embedded in industrial engineering and high-level technical work, Schwab was exposed early to the intersection of science, business, and political power. Schwab studied mechanical engineering at the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Zurich, one of Europe's premier engineering schools. He later earned a doctorate in economics from the University of Fribourg and completed a Master of Public Administration at Harvard's John F. Kennedy School of Government. It was at Harvard where Schwab was deeply influenced by the teachings of Henry Kissinger, a political theorist and statesman who would become a key figure in U.S. foreign policy and global governance. Kissinger's focus on realpolitik, diplomacy through power, and elite-led systems of control appeared to leave a lasting mark on the young Schwab. In 1971, Schwab founded the European Management Forum, a non-profit foundation based in Geneva. The forum brought together business leaders, politicians, economists, and thinkers from across Europe to discuss how businesses and governments could cooperate more closely. In the early years, it was a modest gathering, focusing on European industrial policy. But Schwab had much grander ambitions. By 1987, the European Management Forum had transformed into the World Economic Forum. Its annual meeting, held in Davos, Switzerland, would become the hallmark of the global elite, a place where billionaires, heads of state, CEOs, academics, and thought leaders would gather to discuss the direction of the world. Davos was never about entertainment or superficial media attention. It was a closed-door conference where the world's most powerful people networked, shaped policy, and set the tone for future innovation, cooperation, and control. Schwab introduced the concept of stakeholder capitalism in the early 1970s, a model in which companies are accountable not only to shareholders but also to employees, customers, society, and the environment. It was a vision that blended corporate power with social responsibility. Critics, however, viewed it as a means of extending corporate influence under the guise of morality. As the years progressed, the World Economic Forum expanded its reach. From its humble European beginnings, it became a global powerhouse. Schwab positioned himself not only as an organizer, but as a visionary. Under his leadership, the forum launched initiatives in global health, climate change, digital governance, and even ethical AI. In 2004, WEF helped establish the Global Health Initiative, which would later play a role in pandemic preparedness. In 2011, the forum created the Global Agenda Councils, assembling experts to tackle problems ranging from food security to cyber governance. But it was not until 2020 that Klaus Schwab became a truly household name. In the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, Schwab and the WEF unveiled the now infamous concept of the Great Reset, The idea was presented as a global call to action, to use the crisis of the pandemic as an opportunity to fundamentally restructure economies, societies, and systems. According to Schwab, the pandemic had exposed flaws in capitalism, inequality, climate negligence, and health infrastructure. The Great Reset, he argued, would be a chance to rebuild the world in a fairer, greener, and more sustainable manner. The key pillars of the Great Reset were steering the market toward fairer outcomes, ensuring investments advance shared goals like equality and sustainability, and harnessing innovations of the Fourth Industrial Revolution. These ideas were outlined in Schwab's book, COVID-19, The Great Reset, co-authored with Thierry Malloret. But the response to the Great Reset was far from universally positive. Almost immediately, alternative media, conspiracy theorists, and libertarian thinkers latched onto the phrase. The term Great Reset became synonymous with fears of technocratic control, loss of individual freedoms, and the rise of a one-world government. Critics pointed to the WEF's connections to corporations, billionaires, and political leaders as proof that the Great Reset was not about equality, but about deeper control. The backlash grew stronger with each passing month. Schwab's public statements about how you will own nothing and be happy were interpreted as dystopian visions. Though the phrase itself was not from Schwab directly, but from a 2016 WEF video imagining life in 2030, it became emblematic of what people feared: a future in which property rights, privacy, and independence would be sacrificed for global stability and sustainability. Schwab, however, doubled down. He emphasized the need for global cooperation, for embracing digital currencies, digital ID systems, and ethical AI governance. Under his leadership, the WEF increasingly pushed topics like central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, facial recognition systems, vaccine passports, and ESG, environmental social governance investing. To many, these were signs of progress. To others, signs of soft totalitarianism. The Fourth Industrial Revolution, another of Schwab's flagship ideas, envisions a world where biological, physical, and digital systems converge. Artificial intelligence, gene editing, the Internet of Things, quantum computing, these were no longer distant futures, but active agendas. Schwab wrote an entire book on the subject, published in 2016, arguing that this revolution would fundamentally alter the way we live, work, and interact. But the revolution Schwab advocated was not just technological, it was social and political. He argued that governments and corporations needed to rethink their roles. In this vision, private enterprise would work hand in hand with governments to guide societies. Some saw this as the ultimate form of technocracy, a system ruled not by elected leaders, but by experts and elites. In response, critics began compiling lists of WEF young global leaders, individuals trained or supported by Schwab's forum who had gone on to occupy key positions of power. Names like Emmanuel Macron, Justin Trudeau, Jacinda Ardern, and even Angela Merkel were cited as examples. The claim was that Schwab had built not just a platform, but a pipeline of ideologically aligned leaders who would help implement a coordinated vision of the world. Schwab has never directly denied the strategic nature of the WEF's network. In fact, he's proud of it. He has spoken publicly about the influence the forum has within national governments and multinational corporations. In one famous clip, he notes how the forum has penetrated cabinets of various countries, prompting concerns about sovereignty and democratic accountability. Yet to his supporters, Schwab is a force for good. They argue that he is simply trying to prevent planetary collapse through climate policy, social equity, and global coordination. In a fragmented world, Schwab's WEF provides a space for dialogue. In a world of rising populism, nationalism, and disinformation, Schwab offers technocratic clarity. To them, he is a stabilizer in a chaotic time. To his opponents, however, Klaus Schwab represents something darker. A quiet architect of a system that blurs the line between democracy and corporate governance. A man who wields extraordinary influence without ever being elected, a symbol of globalism, elitism, and managed decline. And yet, Klaus Schwab is not a cartoon villain. He is not hiding in the shadows, nor is he issuing secret commands. He is remarkably public. He gives interviews, writes books, attends conferences, speaks openly about his vision. That is what makes him so unique, and to some, so dangerous. His transparency is mistaken by critics as proof of arrogance. To supporters, it is proof of integrity. As Schwab ages, now in his late 80s, there are questions about succession. Who will inherit the WEF? Will its ideology persist beyond him? His daughter Nicole Schwab has taken on a more visible role in recent years, championing feminist climate policy and gender-inclusive sustainability. Whether this is by design or coincidence, it suggests a dynastic element to the WEF's future. What is certain is that Klaus Schwab has left an indelible mark on the 21st century. Whether that mark is viewed as a blueprint for salvation or a roadmap to control depends entirely on one's perspective. He has made no secret of his belief that crises should be used as catalysts for transformation. In his world, pandemics, financial collapses, and climate disasters are not just challenges. They are opportunities. Opportunities to re-engineer society, to advance technology, and to implement governance models that were once politically impossible. To some, this is visionary. To others, it is exploitative. But Klaus Schwab is nothing if not consistent. For over 50 years, he has convened the world's elite to push one message. Cooperation is the only path forward, and technocratic governance is the only model capable of handling modern complexity. Whether this is true or merely convenient for those in power remains the great debate of our age. The term global governance has been a central theme in Klaus Schwab's work for decades. To some, this phrase sounds like a logical evolution of our interconnected world, the need for international coordination in a global economy. But to others, it rings alarm bells. It implies the dilution of national sovereignty, the weakening of democratic institutions, and the empowerment of unelected bodies with far-reaching influence. Schwab, however, has remained unwavering in his belief that national governments, acting alone, cannot solve the existential problems of this century. Climate change, pandemics, cyber attacks, artificial intelligence, all transcend borders. Schwab argues that only a network of international institutions, corporations, and civil society organizations working in unison can respond adequately to these challenges. This philosophy, while practical on paper, often finds itself at odds with the political realities of nationalism, populism, and anti-globalist sentiment rising around the world. Critics often point to how the WEF encourages public-private partnerships, collaborations where multinational corporations work hand-in-hand with governments and NGOs. In theory, this sounds efficient. In practice, it can blur accountability. Who is responsible when a decision leads to failure, the government or the corporation? Who sets the rules when profit-driven entities help shape public policy? Schwab's vision is built on the premise that capitalism must evolve. He has said repeatedly that the old model, where shareholder profits ruled above all else, is obsolete. Instead, he proposes a form of capitalism that places stakeholders at the center: employees, communities, and the environment. This concept has gained traction among progressive economists and business leaders, especially in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis. But detractors argue that it gives corporations a moral shield while still enabling them to consolidate power. This is especially true in areas like digital surveillance. The WEF has openly explored the future of digital identity systems, biometric verification, and real-time citizen monitoring under the banner of resilience and public safety. Discussions about digital ID cards, central bank digital currencies, vaccine passports, and AI-powered governance have been hosted repeatedly in Davos panels and WEF publications. The language used is often soft, words like inclusion, efficiency, and equity, but the implications are immense. What happens when every transaction, every movement, and every communication is logged in real time by centralized institutions? Who controls the algorithms that shape the future of our freedoms? Schwab doesn't provide easy answers to these questions, but by advocating for these systems, he positions the WEF as not just a policy hub, but a predictive engine of the future. In many ways, Schwab represents a paradox. He is a figure who inspires both admiration and deep suspicion, sometimes from the same people. He advocates peace, but engages with arms manufacturers. He calls for inclusion while inviting only the top tier of global society to his events. He speaks of transparency, but his organization has no real electoral oversight. The WEF is funded through memberships and partnerships, most of which are available only to those who pay substantial fees to join. A seat at Davos is not a right. It is a privilege reserved for the ultra-connected. And yet Schwab sees this not as elitism, but as pragmatism. In his view, if you want to change the world, you must speak directly to those who have the power to do so. Whether they are CEOs, kings, presidents, or tech moguls, it is this group that he believes must be mobilized to act. And so, year after year, they come to Davos, flying in on private jets to discuss climate change, walking past protesters to attend panels on equity and justice. To the outside world, this contradiction is almost satirical. But within the logic of Schwab's vision, it makes sense. He doesn't see the elite as the problem. He sees them as the solution. His mission has always been to guide power, not dismantle it. This worldview extends even into the metaphysical. Schwab has spoken of reshaping the human experience in the context of transhumanism, the merging of biology and technology. The idea that human beings will eventually augment themselves with microchips, brain-computer interfaces, and genetic enhancements is no longer science fiction. It is part of the conversation at the WEF. Schwab believes we are entering an era where the limits of nature, even human nature, will be rewritten. The ethical implications of this are staggering. Who decides what enhancements are permitted? Will these technologies be accessible to all, or only the wealthy? Will they liberate humanity, or divide it further? The WEF insists that these questions are being considered carefully, but many are skeptical. In a world increasingly driven by data, control often follows innovation, and history shows that technology, once created, tends to move faster than ethics. Beyond his books and speeches, Schwab's legacy is being cemented through the institutions he has built. The Global Shapers Community, a WF initiative, seeks to engage young leaders under the age of 30 to shape local communities. These shapers are trained in leadership, sustainability, and global citizenship. On the surface, this looks like an ordinary leadership program, but critics argue it serves as an ideological feeder system, a way to imprint Schwab's vision onto the next generation of influencers. Then there's the Young Global Leaders Program, founded in 2004. It has included names like Mark Zuckerberg, Emmanuel Macron, Gavin Newsom, and Jacinda Ardern. These are not random selections. The program cultivates individuals likely to rise in influence, equipping them with globalist frameworks, exposure to elite networks, and the endorsement of the WEF brand. This network now spans every continent and sector: politics, business, academia, and media. It is one of the most powerful, invisible infrastructures in the modern world. Still, Schwab has his defenders. They argue that the problems he is trying to solve are real: climate instability, income inequality, global health crises, technological disruption. In their view, Schwab is not a villain. He is simply ahead of his time. A man trying to steer a volatile world toward equilibrium, using the only levers that still work: collaboration and technology. But even this defense raises questions. Is it wise to centralize solutions in a world that thrives on decentralization? Is it responsible to trust global coordination to institutions that cannot be voted out, audited, or held accountable in any meaningful way? Schwab's ideas sound noble in PowerPoint slides and polished videos, but implementation always carries trade-offs. The very structure of Davos, with its exclusive invitations, closed-door meetings, and curated panels, feels more like a monarchy than a democracy. Decisions are made by consensus among a few, then pushed outward as thought leadership. Public input is minimal. Dissenting voices are rare. And while the WEF does invite activists and academics, it is clear who sets the tone. Klaus Schwab is not naive about this dynamic. He has spent over 5 decades navigating the corridors of power. He knows how to speak the language of diplomacy, how to frame ambition as necessity, and how to market transformation as inevitability. He is not a tech mogul, not a president, not a general, but his influence rivals all three. There's a reason why figures like Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping, Donald Trump, and Narendra Modi have all attended WEF events. Davos is not just about policy, it is about legitimacy. Appearing at Davos signals that a leader is part of the global conversation. Not attending is seen as withdrawal. Schwab has built a platform where presence equals relevance. But beneath this branding lies a deeper strategy. Schwab has always seen crises not as interruptions, but as inflection points. When markets crash, when pandemics spread, when governments falter, that is when change becomes possible. The Great Reset was not an anomaly. It was the codification of a pattern that had been building for years, a strategy to use chaos as an opportunity. Whether that opportunity is used for liberation or control is the heart of the debate. And this debate will not end when Klaus Schwab retires or even after his death. The institutions he built are self-sustaining. The ideas he championed have taken root in think tanks, universities, corporations, and cabinets around the world. The question is not whether Schwab will remain influential. He already has. The question is whether his vision will become reality, and whether the world will celebrate or resist it when it does. Schwab has long argued that our systems of governance are outdated. In his view, the modern state, designed in the era of nation-states, limited technology, and slow-moving economies, is no longer equipped to manage global challenges. He believes that the future will belong to those who adapt their institutions, integrate digital governance, and embrace what he calls agile regulation. This concept involves shifting from rigid, top-down legislative processes to flexible, iterative models, where public-private partnerships shape rules on the fly. Critics interpret this as a euphemism for corporate lobbying on steroids. Nowhere is this more evident than in the WEF's promotion of multi-stakeholder governance. Unlike traditional democratic models, where elected officials represent the people, this model involves a diverse mix of actors: corporations, NGOs, international organizations, and select government representatives. While this may sound inclusive, the reality is that it dilutes accountability. A multinational company with a seat at the table has no electorate. A non-governmental organization may push an agenda that directly contradicts the will of a nation's citizens. Yet, in Schwab's model, these stakeholders are not just advisors, they are co-governors. One of the more concerning aspects for many is the increasing influence of the WEF in shaping public narratives through media. The forum partners with dozens of mainstream media outlets, from Bloomberg to the New York Times, to frame global issues in a particular way. These partnerships are often described as informational, yet the coordinated messaging seen during events like the pandemic raised red flags among skeptics. Why did so many publications use identical phrasing, "the Great Reset," in headlines? Why did critical voices seem to disappear from the mainstream conversation? To be fair, Schwab himself does not run these media outlets, but the WEF's influence is such that editorial perspectives often align with its framework. Terms like "build back better," "new normal," and "inclusive capitalism" became ubiquitous, not because of grassroots support, but because they were pushed by the elite echo chamber that Schwab cultivated. Even the educational landscape has felt the WEF's touch. Through its influence over universities and think tanks, the forum has helped shape what future generations of leaders are taught. Economics departments increasingly reflect stakeholder capitalism. Environmental science curriculums borrow from the forum's climate change frameworks. Public policy programs use WEF case studies. What begins as intellectual dialogue soon becomes ideological orthodoxy. Schwab's emphasis on artificial intelligence is another flashpoint. He has stated that AI will transform everything, from policing and finance to medicine and warfare. But he also argues that the current legal and moral frameworks cannot keep pace with these changes. Thus, the WEF has launched initiatives to draft ethical AI principles, guidelines for autonomous weaponry, and governance structures for algorithmic decision-making. Again, on paper, this appears thoughtful. But critics ask, who gave the WEF this mandate? Who decided that an unelected body of technocrats, billionaires, and academics should write the moral code for machines that will soon govern our lives? Shouldn't these questions be debated in public forums, not in secluded alpine resorts behind closed doors? The centralization of digital infrastructure is another area where Schwab's fingerprints are visible. The WEF has consistently promoted the development of global digital identity systems. These would integrate biometric data, health records, financial activity, and even social behavior into a single profile. Ostensibly, this would simplify verification, prevent fraud, and streamline access to services. But it also opens the door to unprecedented surveillance. What happens when access to banking, travel, education, or even voting is tied to a digital identity controlled by supranational systems? Who decides what data gets stored, shared, or flagged? If a person posts something deemed misinformation online, could that affect their credit score or employment opportunities? These questions, once confined to dystopian fiction, are now part of serious policy discussions, and the WEF is leading the charge. In recent years, Schwab has also become a target of populist movements around the world. Protesters have gathered outside Davos summits carrying signs that read, "We do not consent," and say no to the Great Reset. They see Schwab not as a philosopher, but as an engineer of soft tyranny, a man who wraps control in the language of compassion, who rebrands surveillance as safety and centralized power as cooperation. To understand this backlash, one must understand the growing distrust of institutions. In the past 2 decades, trust in governments, media, and financial systems has plummeted across the Western world. Economic inequality has widened. Scandals have exposed corruption at the highest levels. When an elite gathering like the WEF tells the public to trust the experts, it falls on deaf ears for those who feel left behind or actively betrayed. Schwab, in his own way, acknowledges this. He has said repeatedly that trust is the most important currency of the modern world. But critics argue that trust cannot be engineered. It must be earned. And many feel that the WEF's top-down approach, with its lack of transparency, does the opposite. Then there is the issue of political neutrality. The WEF claims to be a neutral platform. But over the years, it has clearly leaned into certain ideologies, particularly those that favor centralized governance, technocratic solutions, and sustainability frameworks that mirror progressive political agendas. This has alienated conservative leaders and thinkers who view the forum as an arm of global liberalism. Donald Trump's 2018 appearance at Davos was a case in point. His America First message clashed starkly with the WEF's globalist ethos. While Schwab was polite, it was clear that the two men viewed the world through radically different lenses. Trump emphasized national sovereignty, economic nationalism, and border control. Schwab emphasized interdependence, open markets, and global coordination. The tension was palpable and symbolic of the broader clash between populism and globalism. Yet Schwab continues to invite diverse voices to the table. Perhaps he understands that the WEF must at least appear inclusive to maintain legitimacy. But true inclusivity would involve allowing real dissent, not just controlled opposition. And here lies another contradiction. The WEF claims to embrace diverse perspectives, but the solutions it offers often converge on a singular vision, one led by data, administered by experts, and managed through technology. This vision is seductive. It promises efficiency, sustainability, safety. But at what cost? What happens to freedom when every risk is mitigated by control? What happens to creativity when every variable is managed by algorithms? What happens to democracy when decisions are made not by elected officials, but by panels of stakeholders meeting in private? Klaus Schwab has never fully answered these questions. Perhaps he cannot. Perhaps no one can. But the fact remains that his influence is vast and still growing. He has advised presidents and prime ministers, worked with Fortune 500 CEOs, and published books read in multiple languages. He has created a forum that is both reviled and revered. And through it all, he remains largely unchallenged by the institutions he helped shape. Some say Schwab is merely a mirror, reflecting the desires of the elite back to themselves. Others say he is an architect, designing a future where control is disguised as cooperation. But perhaps the truth lies somewhere in between. He is a man of his time, and ahead of it, a figure who understands power, not as brute force, but as narrative. A man who has turned networking into a form of governance, who has built a soft empire without armies or elections, who has redefined leadership in the age of uncertainty. As we move deeper into the 21st century, the world Klaus Schwab envisioned is no longer speculative. It is materializing in real time. Smart cities, programmable currencies, AI judges, algorithmic policing, universal digital IDs, these are no longer pilot programs. They are policies. And while Schwab may not implement them personally, his fingerprints are on the blueprints. In the end, the question is not whether Klaus Schwab is right or wrong. The question is whether the world he is helping to build is one we want to live in, one governed by efficiency or by empathy, by algorithms or by intuition, by consensus or by choice. And that perhaps is the most important legacy Klaus Schwab will leave behind. Not a set of policies, but a set of questions. Questions that each society, each generation, and each individual must answer for themselves. In discussions surrounding Klaus Schwab, there is one persistent detail that often goes unnoticed in mainstream profiles: his personal secrecy. For all his global influence, very little is publicly known about his private life. While countless public figures of his stature have biographies, exposés, or even public scandals detailing their past, Schwab's personal narrative remains tightly controlled. This has only further fueled speculation among critics and alternative researchers alike. It is known that Schwab resides in Switzerland, maintains a relatively low public profile outside of the Davos events, and has 2 children. His wife, Hilda Schwab, co-founded the Schwab Foundation for Social Entrepreneurship. This initiative, which sounds philanthropic on the surface, aims to empower individuals and startups solving social issues. However, even this has been critiqued as part of the WEF's larger strategy, using soft power to shape cultural and social norms through elite-backed innovation. Digging into Schwab's early associations, one encounters more murky connections. For instance, as mentioned earlier, his father, Eugen Schwab, managed an Escher-Wyss factory in Ravensburg that was later found to have used forced labor during World War II. The same company was involved in producing turbines for Nazi Germany's heavy water projects, critical to their nuclear ambitions. While Klaus Schwab himself was just a child at the time, and there is no direct evidence linking him to these activities, his silence on the subject has drawn criticism. For a man so eager to shape the moral future of humanity, the absence of public reckoning with his own family's historical connections has not gone unnoticed. Then there's the question of ideology. What truly drives Schwab? Is he a pragmatic realist, a utopian globalist, a technocratic mastermind? His writings offer some clues. Across his published books, The Fourth Industrial Revolution, Shaping the Future of the Fourth Industrial Revolution, and COVID-19, The Great Reset, Schwab articulates a consistent worldview. Humanity is on the brink of transformation, and we must guide it with intention. He often writes about systems leadership, a term that refers to individuals or institutions capable of orchestrating multi-sector collaboration toward common goals. Schwab doesn't see leadership as something bound to electoral cycles. To him, true leadership is long-term, data-informed, and insulated from the volatility of public opinion. Again, the subtext here is clear. The future should not be determined by the masses, but by a coordinated elite. This is where his critics become most vocal. They argue that Schwab's vision, no matter how well-intentioned, inevitably leads to oligarchy, that in trying to save humanity from chaos, he is designing a cage made not of bars, but of QR codes, digital passports, and algorithmic nudges, a world where everything is optimized and everyone is monitored. Perhaps the most alarming aspect for many is the WEF's openness about brain transparency and neurotechnology. In recent Davos panels, experts openly discussed the future of workplace monitoring via brainwaves. Imagine an office where your focus level is tracked in real time, where your emotional state is logged, and your productivity is assessed by EEG sensors. This is not science fiction. It is emerging technology. And under the framework promoted by the WEF, it is being discussed as a necessary step toward a more efficient, resilient workforce. Schwab argues that these tools must be governed ethically, but critics ask a different question. Why are these tools being developed at all? If the underlying logic of modern capitalism requires human beings to surrender their thoughts for productivity, perhaps it's not the workers who need to adapt, but the system itself. Beyond neuroscience, Schwab's WEF has taken a keen interest in food systems. The Forum is a major advocate for sustainable agriculture, which includes the use of synthetic meat, insect-based protein, vertical farming, and lab-grown alternatives. These ideas are sold under the banner of climate sustainability and food equity. But to skeptics, it sounds like engineered scarcity, where natural food becomes a luxury and populations are conditioned to accept artificial substitutes. Indeed, the now viral slogan, "You'll own nothing and be happy," stems from a 2016 WEF article imagining a future where goods are shared, privacy is gone, and life is seamless. The piece, meant as speculative fiction, has become prophetic. In many cities, car ownership is declining. Housing is increasingly unaffordable. Subscription models dominate everything from software to basic appliances. While marketed as convenience, the end result is a population increasingly dependent on access controlled by corporate gatekeepers. This is the future Schwab envisions, a post-ownership economy where access replaces property, AI guides decisions, and centralized systems govern everything from currency to behavior. And while Schwab might view this as rational evolution, his critics see it as the end of individual agency. Another lesser-known aspect of the WEF's influence lies in its partnerships with central banks. The Forum has been instrumental in discussions around central bank digital currencies, CBDCs. These digital assets, unlike decentralized cryptocurrencies, would be fully controlled by state or supranational authorities. CBDCs offer the promise of speed, traceability, and anti-fraud features, but they also enable programmable finance, money that can be restricted, redirected, or even expired by those in control. Imagine a future where your ability to spend is tied to social compliance. Miss a booster shot, your account is frozen, speak against government policy, your digital wallet is restricted. The potential for financial coercion becomes limitless. While the WEF doesn't directly build CBDCs, it creates the narrative that normalizes them. Through white papers, economic panels, and policy simulations, it shapes how decision-makers think. Schwab doesn't pass laws, but he doesn't need to. His influence lies in the Overton window, the range of ideas deemed acceptable, and by constantly expanding that window toward technocratic solutions, he ensures that the unimaginable becomes the inevitable. There is also the question of succession. Schwab is now well into his 80s, yet there is no clear successor with the same visionary appeal. His daughter Nicole is being groomed for leadership, but she lacks the gravitas and global recognition her father commands. The WEF may continue, but without Schwab's personal charisma and intellectual heft, it risks becoming just another policy organization. Important, but not transformative. Unless, of course, Schwab's ideas have already passed the tipping point. Perhaps his greatest success is not the WEF, but the fact that his ideas have embedded themselves so deeply into global discourse that they no longer need his presence. Stakeholder capitalism, digital identity, the fourth industrial revolution, these terms now exist independently of their author. They are repeated in boardrooms, parliaments, classrooms. They are no longer proposals. They are trajectories. This is the ultimate power, not just to influence decisions, but to shape reality itself. Klaus Schwab's genius, if it can be called that, lies in his patience. He didn't try to change the world overnight. He built alliances. He cultivated leaders. He wrote books. He hosted forums. Slowly, methodically, he turned Davos into a Vatican of technocracy, a place where ideology is dressed in the robes of inevitability. And now, as the world grapples with climate emergencies, AI disruptions, demographic shifts, and geopolitical instability, his vision has become the fallback plan. Not because it's perfect, but because there is no coherent alternative. In the end, whether one views Klaus Schwab as a savior or a manipulator may not matter. What matters is that he has created the blueprint for a post-national, post-democratic, post-human future. And that blueprint is being built all around us. The buildings are already going up. The networks are already in place. The codes are being written. And while some resist, many more comply, willingly, eagerly, unknowingly, because control is not always imposed. Sometimes it is welcomed, especially when it arrives not with chains, but with apps, not with orders, but with upgrades, not with tyranny, but with trust. And that may be Klaus Schwab's most profound insight of all.